Good evening and welcome to Face to Face, the show where we talk with local broadcasters here in South Dakota. Today on the show we have someone who's been in the business for 32 years. So it's no wonder that we've had many requests to have him on the show today. I have on the show Mr. Ratt Reno from KXRB Radio.
Well, thank you for having me
thank
here
you
on
for
Owl
having me.
TV, and what a beautiful studio you've got here at Lincoln High School.
Oh, thank you. Can you give just a brief biography of yourself to the viewers at home who don't listen to your show?
Well, who would that be?
The two people.
Oh, no, maybe the two people that do listen. KXRB started 32 years ago in February, actually, was our birthday, and me being 24 years old at the time. Why? Now, KXRB started 32 years ago, and I had a little bit of radio experience, probably 6 months at a little station in Tennessee before, and came up here because I had been here in South Dakota before and liked it here, came up, applied for the job, and never found a real job.
What got you interested in radio?
Well, for one thing, I started playing with crystal radios and building radios when I was a kid in high school.
Really?
And I've been a ham radio operator since I was 15, way back. Then you probably got some amateur radio operators here in the high school, I would imagine. So always had an interest in radio and music, played drums, played in bands, wound up in Nashville as trying to be a songwriter. It was my goal. Ran across a guy down there by the name of David Price who had some pretty good sized records. Got to know David, and he hired me to book his band, and he said, by the way, he says, I own a radio station, and I'd like you to be on the radio, too, because I need somebody for that.
Wow. So you started exposed to the music in concerts and so forth, listening to it before you went to radio?
Yeah, I played in bands for years, you know, and before
What
that.
type of music was this? All country
Mainly
music?
country and the old rockabilly stuff, things like that, back in the, in my younger years.
Back in the time, did you have any, were there any classes you could take in high school or college that helped you?
No, didn't have such a thing back then. So the students here are very fortunate to have, this kind of equipment and the experience they can get doing this. And I think this is great for the kids.
What was your first day on the radio like?
Horrible. Horrible. In fact, I wish I had a tape of it. This was in Tennessee, the little radio station, right? So David, that owned the station, the guy I mentioned earlier, took me out there the night before. He said, here's the button you push to turn the transmitter on. Here's the commercials, copybook. Here's a copy of 45 RPM of Dixie. Okay? He says, you play Dixie to sign on. He says, if it says do a commercial, you read whatever commercial it is. There's a stack of records. Have a nice day. So it's like sink or swim. So anyway, that's what I started out. I just started out doing, sink or swim, and you learn fast. It sounded really bad, of course, but you learn fast. So I didn't go to radio school. Most of the people around here go to Brown Institute up in Minneapolis, and they, to learn the business. But
do you think that would have helped you had you gone to a broadcasting school beforehand, or did the hands-on experience work?
Better to just jump in and do it. You're going to learn fast. And you reinvent the wheel every 15 minutes, so as soon as you learn how to do it, it's really pretty easy. It's not that difficult.
What did you have to learn first? As soon as you got in there, what was going through your mind, and what were you learning right away?
Actually, like I say, it's not that difficult. You learn how to play a record, you learn how to talk, and
had you experience with speech before? Did you know what you sounded like on the radio?
None other than my amateur radio experience of talking, but that was more talking on a one-on-one thing. And maybe that helps too, because in broadcasting, you don't broadcast. You talk on a one-on-one basis, and if you're listening to somebody on the radio and they sound like they're broadcasting, they're not doing it right. It should be, when you're listening to your favorite, whether it's our station or any station, and you're listening to somebody on the radio, you should have a connection between you as a listener and that guy on the air,
What was your shift like when you first started out in radio? Did you do a morning, or did you have that grave night?
That was a morning thing, yeah, at the little station. I was only there for like 6 months. Heard about KXRB starting up here in Sioux Falls, applied for the job, and for some strange reason they hired me. It wasn't for my talent, that's for sure. And have worked all the shifts out there in the last 32 years. Now I do mornings, along with Mark Tasser is my morning partner, by the way. And Mark and I do mornings 6 to 10. And we're an AM, daytime, country station. And we try and play as much as we can of the, what classic country we can, you know, the older classic. And that's where our niche is to try and play the classic country. And the new stuff that is more of a country nature. What I mean is it sounds more traditional, like Alan Jackson, you know, that type of thing. Randy Travis songs.
When did you move up here to Sioux Falls?
That was, we signed on in February of 1969. So I moved, I had lived here before, so I came back in the fall of '68 and helped put the station on the air.
What was your opinion of country music at the time? Because you really...
Was born and raised with it. So
you were used to it all of your life. Did you enjoy country music at the time, or was it kind of in that, did it have a definite tone? Was country music fairly strong in this area, or was it still in this vague area?
There wasn't any.
Really?
No radio, no country radio. Some of the stations would play a little bit what they call block programming, an hour here, an hour there. But we were the first full-time country station between Minneapolis and Denver.
Wow.
So it really went over big. People were really hungry for it at that time. It really hit. And country music in 1969 had started to get a little more uptown, a little better quality sound. Technology had improved. And so we were at the right place at the right time. And we just killed them on ratings, you know. And still do, I might add. Our ratings are still really up there, very good, very high for an AM station. And the reason I differentiate between AM and FM, of course, most of the market, and I'm sure most of your younger people are more accustomed to listening to FM. And of course, we're AM.
Was there a difference between when you were down in Tennessee and when you came up here to South Dakota? I mean, both in the style of music, what people wanted to hear, or just in general?
It was about the same, as far as the taste in country music.
Both, or just the style that they played. I'm assuming Hank Williams at the time was still fairly big.
Yes.
But was there anything that you saw as a major change from the style that you did down in Tennessee from when you came up here, like the way that you did your program on the radio?
No, basically the same. Country music is pretty well the same, worldwide, and of course the records come out of Nashville. The production is out of there. The only difference, to answer your question, probably is the fact at that time in that part of Tennessee, which this was about Centerville, Tennessee. It's about 50 miles southeast of Nashville. A little more bluegrass.
Okay.
If you're familiar with bluegrass, Flat and Scruggs, that kind of thing. Probably a little more bluegrass flavor back then, but that's still big around the country, But basically, music's the same worldwide. Country music's the same pretty much all over.
What have you seen in the difference of country music? 70s, the 80s, the 90s when you had that pretty big country explosion. You had
right.
Garth Brooks came in.
Class of 89.
Really, it's this huge. Now it's kind of died back down. You still have Faith Hill and Shania Twain still fairly big. But what have you seen along the years?
I think we've seen a shift to more of a pop sound.
Do you think that's good, or?
Personally, I don't, as far as from a music standpoint. From a music standpoint, I would go a little more with, I would pigeonhole it just a little more. It's more, I would like it more straight country here, pop over here, jazz here, and, not combined quite so much. But you have to remember, in order for anybody to make a living, whether it's producing records, writing the songs, the entertainers, or radio, or TV, or anything, you have to sell a product somewhere. And you get into that commercialism. And the broader it is, the more commercial it is, the easier it is to sell the product. And so by the nature of the business, if you're in commercial radio, you have to be commercial. And I think country music has gone maybe a little too commercial in some areas.
Really?
I kind of do.
And such as like, like how, are you talking about in the example of like how Faith Hill is a spokesman for Pepsi now?
Yeah, and I would say, commercial as far as selling records and selling product that way. But I would categorize that type of music as a little more leaning toward pop than country. Would you?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Do you want country to go back to more traditional roots? But if you agree with that, would you think that it would be well for the business?
That it would be better for the
Yeah.
business?
If it returned more to its southern roots of like how you played in the 70s and 80s.
I think it would be better for the business because I think a lot of people, and listeners, when I'm saying people, listeners and
Mhm.
fans, I think a lot of them have left country music because it isn't country enough. A lot of the record producers and the record companies, they say, well, Faith Hill, for instance, not picking on her, but you can bring her up as an example,
Mhm.
has probably brought a lot of people into what they call country music. But have she really? She's brought them into more pop area, I think, Get a little philosophy here, probably.
In the what was the style that you saw in the earlier days of the 70s in the country? Because country, when you think of it, the explosion happened, like I said, in the early 90s. But before then, you really just had, Hank Williams Jr., George Strait comes to mind, and the big one in the 80s is the Charlie Daniels Band.
Right.
What was?
You're talking of the late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, and then, early 80s as well.
Yeah, of course you had Conway Twitty, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, Tammy Wynette, and those kind of people. And they were all pretty well basic, straight country arrangements, country singers, pretty straight. And that was pretty much the thrust of it in the late 60s, early 70s. Those particular artists like that.
How many people have you seen come and gone through KXRB?
As far as country entertainers or
Talent.
air people?
Air people.
Oh, we've had quite a few. Joe Morrison, I might mention Joe's name. Joe started with us in 1969, and Joe is still there, which is kind of unusual. Joe and I were just talking about the other day, kind of unusual to have Joe Morrison and myself still there that were there when it first started at a station that long. There aren't many stations can say that. Now, another thing, too, we had a book out, our 30th anniversary book.
Really?
For KXRB. And there's no way to verify this, and I talked to the Country Music Association and the Country Music Foundation, and there's no way to verify it, but we think that KXRB is probably, if not the only, one of the only stations in the United States that started as country and is still there 32 years later.
So, the longest in consistency.
The longest that started as country. In other words, WSM, of course, 650 in Nashville, the Grand Ole Opry station, they've been on the air since 1927, I think, something like that. But they didn't start as country. That's the key word, that started format as country and has never changed.
What's been the biggest change that you've seen at KXRB? As far, it could be as talent or as on air or in the technology. Technology, when we started out, everything was 45 RPM records or the 33 albums, And of course, they've gone by the wayside totally. The next thing was CDs, and now everything's on computer. The songs are all on computer, the commercials are all on computer. Is that good or bad? Or?
Oh, it's great. It's so much easier because it used to be, you imagine, there were 2-minute songs. You'd cue up a record, you had 2 minutes to get your next, to set up the next project, whatever you were going to do, commercials, whatever. Now the thing will run itself. So yeah, computerization has been a big change, but it's been great. It makes it easy, especially when you get my age and you get lazy.
Is age, you bring up age, is it a factor with this job in radio? I mean, people talk about it on television a lot, is that, when they start out young, they're good and they're full of energy, but as they get older, they're more wary about their jobs because they don't know if they're going to have them for much longer.
Well, I don't think in country it makes so much difference. In fact, it probably helps because the fact you can tell stories about artists that, hey, I've been there, done that, and seen them, talked to them, interviewed them. And so it gives you a little more depth, I think, in country music. In other formats, maybe it would be detrimental.
Is there, I guess, what's the big difference between other radio stations, like Top 40 or Adult Contemporary, compared to country radio stations? Do you see more consistency?
Never having been in any other format except country, it's kind of hard for me to answer that. I guess the only thing I could say is country music and country radio is very consistent through the years. It hasn't really changed all that much, other than the music product has changed somewhat. But I think the listeners have remained somewhat the same because loyalty comes into it. I think country radio listeners are very loyal to country radio and to country artists, their favorite artists and so forth. I guess that would be it. You have more loyalty from the listeners and the fans, and it's more consistent. And the artists, I think, are loyal to their fans on the other side of the thing too. You take guys like Willie Nelson's been around forever, but Willie's very approachable, and I think most of the country artists are approachable. They'll sit down and visit with you if they can. I think that'd probably be the big difference. The artists are more genuine, and the listeners are more genuine. I think there's a two-way street there, that you might not find in other formats.
These are just kind of, best worst questions. What's been one of your more embarrassing moments ever on the air?
I'd tell you that, but I can't say it on TV. Saying bad words. Accidentally, not on purpose. We always try it in country form. In fact, there's things today that you could say on radio that you wouldn't begin to say on radio 30 years ago.
Is that good, or do you think that's...
I to a certain degree, it's probably good that you can be a little more quote normal. But I don't believe in the Howard Stern type of radio and the shock jock thing and that business. I don't think there's a place for that. I just don't go along with it.
Would that work here in South Dakota if there was one?
I don't think it would for country listeners. I really don't. I just wouldn't want to go there.
You hear a lot about big DJs like Howard Stern, Don Imus. Just regular DJs, national ones like Casey Kasem. You don't hear too much about that with country DJs. Are there any?
Oh, good point.
Are there any big country DJs out there that
that's a good point. There really aren't. There's some that syndicate some programs, but
is that good or bad, actually, though?
Boy, that is really a good question, and I really don't know the answer to that. The last world-known one. Boy.
Does KXRB have any syndicated shows?
Yeah, we run a few things, the top 10 count or top 20 countdowns, and a few countdown things that are syndicated, come in on CD. But there are no nationally known disc jockeys in country music, I guess. It's a good point. I never thought about it. Ralph Emery, I guess, would have been the last one.
Really?
People remember Ralph Emery, but Ralph's retired pretty much out of the business.
When did...
why was he?
Well, just when did he... when was his span, I guess?
Ralph was on WSM, did an all-night show years and years ago, back in the 60s, and then was on, when the Nashville Network started, did a live TV show.
Really?
For a good number of years, and Ralph Emery would be the nationally known or world-known country music personality, I guess.
What's been one of your more interesting moments on radio? Not exactly embarrassing, but a time where someone said, think of a moment in your career, and there's one that sticks in your mind.
Oh, boy, I guess the ones I'm thinking of are the embarrassing ones where bad words would slip out accidentally. Not so much live on air, because live on air you reinvent the wheel every 15 minutes. You just kind of keep doing the same thing. So I would say the better things that stand out would have been the interviews with different artists on tape that that we've done.
Who have you interviewed?
Oh, Willie Nelson, Tammy Wynette, George Jones. No, I didn't interview George, but I talked to him a couple of times. Johnny Cash, Chet Atkins, Waylon Jennings, just about oh gosh, Ernest Tubb, Kitty Wells, Jerry Lee Lewis a couple of times.
Really?
I guess I could get a laundry list, but pretty well everybody that's been on the ground, everybody that's on the former Grand Ole Opry members and most of the current ones, that's been the best part of it, is talking to those people through the years. So if you name anybody that's ever been on the Opry, I've probably talked to them one time or another, and good people.
With country music, I guess one thing that always springs to my mind is, the Sioux Empire Fair, and they usually have at least one or two country acts around here, and they do fairly well. Do they? Is that part for the fact that we have a pretty strong, country support in this area?
Oh yeah, of course, country music worldwide is a good draw at shows, but I think through here, let's face it, agriculture is the #1 industry in the state, and rural people and city people, but how many people in town are just one step removed from the farm? And we've all got country roots, don't we? Pretty much.
When did that, I talked earlier about the explosion of country music. When did that sort of happen? Around late 80s, early 90s?
Well, I think you're talking, what is it, the class of '89 they call it, isn't it? When Garth Brooks, Travis Tritt, I think Marty Stewart came along about then, and Randy Travis, and there was quite a group of them hit in late '80s, early '90s that are still big entertainers.
Mm-hmm.
These are all guys and gals that were good writers, singers, players, performers, and you have to have a lot of talent to stick through it in this day and age too, because there's so many new people coming out, one-hit wonders. And
Do you see, you were talking more about the legends of country music, George Jones and Tammy Wynette, Reba McEntire. You see much more of those in country music than you do in rock or in jazz, in pretty much any other form. Is that good or bad for country music that you don't see that many, one-hit wonders that you were talking about?
And so the question is, with these big names that come along, the longevity in country music, as opposed to other types of music where maybe they...
like today, there's a lot of top 40 hits that are really just one-hit wonders that you might not see in 5 years.
I see, as opposed to country music, where they...
Reba McEntire can put out, a hit after hit after hit, and she's been doing it for years now.
And the question being, why is it in country music as opposed to other formats? I think for one thing, as we mentioned earlier, the fans are more loyal. And I think in country music, you've got, not knocking other formats, but I think it takes some real talent to make it in country music, and I think these people are really well-rounded, talented people that get into it and stay in the business. And if you look at a lot of these people in country music, well, look at Reba right now. She's got a tremendous review, or she's had tremendous reviews on Annie Get Your Gun and on Broadway. The thing has been held over. I think she's going to even continue it for another year or so. So she's doing a Broadway show. Roger Miller wrote all the music to Big River on Broadway, which was a huge, huge smash on Broadway quite a few years ago. But you get people, and of course acting. Kenny Rogers is a good actor. Dolly Parton, I just heard where they're after her to do another movie. So you get a lot of these people are good writers, players, actors, singers. They're multi-talented people, a lot of these. And I think you see that more in country music probably than any other form of music, where they can get in all types of medium.
What's going to be the last thing you do before you retire? Are you going to play a country song? Your last song that you play on the air?
Oh,
Is
sure.
It gonna be country?
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't be on radio doing anything but country music. If somebody came to me and wanted, can you imagine me being on a rock station? I don't think that would go over. I don't think it would. Yeah, it's got to be country. Got to be country, and that's what I'll be doing.
What's sort of the trick of the trade that you've learned after all these years of being on the radio?
Probably, as we mentioned earlier, talking on a one-on-one, not broadcasting, not, quote, being a broadcaster, but communication. Communicating with the people, being down home, being yourself, what you see is what you get, and I think talking to the listeners, and not as listeners, but as people on their level.
Do you see that more often with other DJs, with rock and so forth, that they become larger than themselves?
Well, it's hard for me to judge because I can't really be a judge of other disc jockeys, because there's a lot of them that are a lot more successful than me and making a lot of money. Howard Stern, for example, making millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard for me to judge somebody else, another disc jockey. I do it the way I'm used to doing it, and I can't really say the others are wrong. Some of them make a lot more money than I am. If that's a measure of success, they're a lot more successful than me.
Is KXRB always going to be country, or will someday country music just not do so well that it'll become something else?
I think KXRB is probably the best niche of any of them, because we've stayed, country all these years, and these things go in cycles of, real country, pop country. We've seen the cycle go back and forth, and we've stayed pretty much the same. So we're into a kind of a pop country thing right now, as you mentioned. Some of the other quote pop country artists, and if their stardom fades, we're still the same. We're still country, and I think the basic roots of country will always be there. It's it's an American music.
What would you like to tell future disc jockeys, rock or country?
For young people getting into radio today, I would say the biggest problem, I mentioned computers is one of the best things that's happened in radio. It's also one of the worst, because I call it McRadio. Everybody sounds the same. Everybody does this. You go any place in the country, they all sound the same.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to, say, we keep mentioning Howard Stern, Don Imus, and some of these guys that have made lots of money in the business, when you hear them, you know who they are. Bob Pritchard here in the studio, his dad Wayne had a style, when you heard him, you knew it was him. And I think you've got to get away from the computerized McRadio thing. It's like, do you want to jingle with that? Got to get away from that and be yourself, get your own sound, so when people hear you, they know, hey, this is Ratt, this is Wayne, this is Joe Morrison, this is whoever. And so you've got a niche and a personality.
Wow.
And I think that's one of the things. It's hard for young people to get in radio today and develop that, because the managers and the program directors want them all to sound the same. I get your own niche, get your own personality, and be yourself.
All right. Well, Mr. Reno, I thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
No
I've enjoyed this. This is, like I say again, a wonderful studio you've got, a great setup, and the young people that are running the cameras and doing the work, I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing to help the young people.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
And I thank you for joining us here today on Face to Face. I'm Avi Forstein, and please tune in for our next edition. From all of us here at Owl TV, good night.